At the edge of the Roman Republic's collapse, one name rose from obscurity to dominate the turbulent political and military landscape. Lucius Cornelius Sulla, born in 138 BC into a noble yet impoverished branch of the Corneli family. Sulla's ascent would reshape Rome forever. His life was a volatile blend of brilliance and brutality, defined by ruthless ambition, political cunning, and an unshakable belief in his own destiny. Though born of patrician blood, Sulla's early life bore little privilege. His family had long fallen from influence, and by the time his father died, Sulla was left penniless, forced to live among Rome's lower classes. Yet fortune soon turned. Inheriting wealth from his stepmother and mistress, Sulla rose rapidly. In 107 BC, he was elected quaestor and joined the staff of Consul Gaius Marius during the Jugatine War in North Africa. While Marius led Roman forces in the field, Sulla assembled cavalry in Italy and later joined him in Africa. Sulla proved instrumental in turning the tide. At the Battle of Cirta, he commanded the right wing, breaking through enemy lines and saving the Roman army from encirclement. His daring diplomacy secured Jugurtha's capture, ending the war and earning Sulla widespread praise, but also the bitter jealousy of Marius. Following success in Africa, Sulla continued to climb. He gained popularity for his military logistics during the Cimbrian War and cemented his political career by winning the praetorship through bribes and public favor. As propraetor in Cilicia, Sulla's attention shifted east. The rising power of Mithridates, the sixth of Pontus, threatened Roman interests in Asia Minor. In an audacious campaign with limited troops, Sulla ousted Mithridates' puppet ruler from Cappadocia and restored Rome's authority, establishing ties with the Parthians in the process. But back in Rome, internal strife brewed. In 91 BC. Political tensions exploded with the murder of the reformist tribune, Livius Drusus, plunging the Republic into the social war. Italy's long-neglected allies rebelled, demanding citizenship. Sulla fought alongside Marius, securing early victories and distinguishing himself in battle after battle. His tactical brilliance, including night maneuvers and battlefield deception, turned the tide against the rebels. As the war concluded, Sulla was elected consul in 88 BC, riding a wave of popularity. He secured command of the upcoming war against Mithridates, but Marius, still bitter, allied with radical tribune Sulpicius to have the command reassigned. Sulla, enraged, did the unthinkable. He marched on Rome with his legions. It was the first time a Roman general had invaded the capital. The ensuing battle within Rome's streets was brutal. Sulla broke through the gates, fought fierce resistance, and forced Marius into exile. He overturned Sulpicius' laws, strengthened the Senate, and curbed the power of the tribunes. Then, leaving Rome under fragile control, Sulla departed east to confront Mithridates. By the time he arrived in Greece, Mithridates had slaughtered thousands of Romans in Asia and gained control over vast territories. Sulla besieged Athens and Piraeus, enduring months of hardship and humiliation. When Athens fell, it was sacked in a brutal show of force. Sulla moved north to face Mithridates' forces, winning crushing victories at Chaeronea and Orchomenus despite being heavily outnumbered. But while Sulla was campaigning in the east, Rome descended once again into chaos. Marius returned from exile with the consul Cinna and seized control of the city. What followed was a bloodbath. Enemies of the Marian faction were hunted down and slaughtered. Marius, now an old and broken man, died shortly after taking power. But the terror he helped unleash continued under Sinus' rule. Sulla's victories in Greece forced Mithridates to sue for peace. Though the Senate back in Rome had declared him a public enemy, Sulla ignored them. He had bigger plans. With an army hardened by years of war, he landed in southern Italy in 83 BC, determined to reclaim Rome. His campaign was swift and brutal. Towns that resisted were razed. Enemy generals were defeated in battle after battle. At the Colline Gate, just outside Rome, Sulla faced the last and largest army of the Marian forces. It was a nightmarish clash. Tens of thousands died, but by dawn, Sulla stood victorious. Rome was his. What came next shocked even those who had supported him. Sulla initiated a reign of terror. He published prescriptions lists of enemies marked for death. Their properties were seized, their families ruined. The Senate, now cowed and restructured, granted Sulla dictatorial powers. But unlike past dictators, Sulla did not seek emergency powers for a limited time. He ruled with absolute authority, reshaping laws, courts, and the constitution itself. He weakened the power of the tribunes, restored senatorial dominance, and tried to cement a new order that would prevent another Marius or Sulla from rising again. And then, in an unprecedented move, he walked away. In 79 BC, Sulla voluntarily resigned his dictatorship. He retired to a villa in Campania, surrounded by luxury, writing his memoirs and enjoying the final years of his life. He died in 78 BC, a man both feared and admired. Sulla's legacy is a paradox. He claimed to save the Republic, but his actions shattered its foundations. His brutal march on Rome set a dangerous precedent. Future leaders Pompey, Caesar, even Augustus would follow the path he paved. But unlike them, Sulla had no intention of becoming a monarch. He believed in restoring the old ways, even if it required breaking every rule to do so. Lucius Cornelius Sulla was not just a man of war. He was a visionary of violence, a tactician of politics, and a tyrant who thought himself a savior. And in the blood-soaked shadows of the Republic he helped destroy, the empire was already beginning to stir. Sulla's triumphs in Greece had cemented his reputation as one of Rome's greatest military minds. But while he fought abroad, Rome had descended into bloodshed. His old rival, Gaius Marius, along with Lucius Cornelius Cinna, had seized control of the city in his absence. What followed was a reign of terror executions, exiles, and purges aimed at Sulla's allies. When Marius died shortly after reclaiming power, Cinna ruled as consul, preparing for Sulla's inevitable return. In 83 BC, Sulla landed in southern Italy with a hardened army. Veterans of his eastern campaign, loyal and battle-tested, followed him to retake Rome. He quickly gained support from senators, aristocrats, and young, ambitious generals including Gnaeus Pompeius, later known as Pompey the Great. Civil war erupted once again. Over the next year, Sulla advanced northward, winning a series of brutal battles against the Marian forces. At the Battle of Sacriportus and the later siege of Praenester, he crushed the resistance. Rome fell to him once more in 82 BC, and this time, Sulla would not forgive. He initiated the infamous proscriptions, a legalized list of enemies marked for death. Property was confiscated, families destroyed, and thousands perished in the political purges. With Rome firmly under his control, Sulla did something no Roman had done before. He declared himself dictator without a time limit. Traditionally, a dictator served for 6 months during emergencies. Sulla held absolute power indefinitely. His constitutional reforms were sweeping. He stripped the tribunes of their powers, increased the Senate's size with his own loyalists, and restructured Rome's courts and laws to favor the aristocracy. His goal was to restore the authority of the Senate and the traditional order, but it came at the price of democratic institutions and civil freedoms. The Republic, in name, still stood, but it was no longer the Republic it once was. In an unexpected move, Sulla voluntarily stepped down from his dictatorship in 79 BC, claiming he had accomplished his mission. He retired to his estate in Campania, indulging in lavish banquets and writing his memoirs. Many believed he feared assassination. Others saw it as the final proof of his absolute confidence. He believed Rome was secure without him, but Rome was far from stable. Though Sulla lived for only another year, dying in 78 BC from liver failure or perhaps internal bleeding, the forces he unleashed would not be contained. His brutal methods became a precedent. His young protege Pompey and his former subordinate Julius Caesar would carry forward the torch of ambition. The Republic was fatally wounded. Sulla was a paradox, a defender of the Senate who destroyed Rome's norms, a restorer of order who bathed the city in blood, a man who marched on Rome not once but twice, changing forever what Roman power looked like. He died peacefully in his villa, but his legacy was anything but quiet. Civil war would return. The Republic would fall, and in its ashes, an empire would rise. Sulla had shown Rome that power could come at the point of a sword, and once taken, it need not be returned. When Sulla died in 78 BC, Rome did not exhale in relief. It held its breath, because though the man was gone, the world he had created remained. His death marked the end of a chapter, but not the end of the chaos. The Republic had been pushed to the brink, its constitutional foundations shattered, its traditions warped. And now, in the power vacuum left behind, new forces began to stir. The first test of Sulla's reforms came almost immediately. That very year, a rebellion erupted under Marcus Aemilius Lepidus. Once an ally of Sulla, he positioned himself as the champion of the people, calling for the reversal of Sulla's laws, the restoration of land to the dispossessed, and justice for those who had suffered under the proscriptions. Rome was once again facing the specter of civil war, but Lepidus lacked Sulla's discipline, military brilliance, and decisiveness. His rebellion faltered, crushed by those who had once fought alongside Sulla. But his challenge revealed a deep truth: Sulla had not healed Rome. He had frozen its crisis in time, and that freeze was beginning to thaw. Meanwhile, young men who had come of age during the terror were learning all the wrong lessons. Chief among them was Gaius Julius Caesar. Caesar was a nephew of Marius, and he had barely escaped death during Sulla's purges thanks to powerful connections. Sulla had reluctantly spared his life, but reportedly said, "There are many Mariuses in that boy." He wasn't wrong. Caesar had witnessed the horrors of dictatorship, but also its power. He learned that in Rome, might could rewrite law. Loyalty was more valuable than tradition, and ambition was not a crime if you won. And then there was Pompey. Gnaeus Pompeius Magnus Pompey the Great had risen under Sulla's command. Despite his youth, he had proven a fearless and ruthless commander. After Sulla's death, Pompey remained at the center of Roman politics and military campaigns. He crushed revolts in Sicily, cleaned up the remnants of Lepidus' forces, and was seen by many as the natural heir to Sulla's legacy. But Pompey was no simple warlord. He wanted legitimacy. He sought glory, and most dangerously, he wanted the love of the Roman people. He styled himself as a restorer of order, but would eventually clash with the Senate when his ambitions grew too large for the Republic to contain. As the 70s and 60s BC unfolded, Rome found itself embroiled in the Spartacus slave revolt, the greatest rebellion of enslaved people in Roman history, challenged Roman power in Italy. It took years and a brutal campaign by Marcus Licinius Crassus to defeat the uprising. Crassus, another survivor of Sulla's era, had grown immensely wealthy during the proscriptions, buying up confiscated land and properties. Now, he sought political dominance to match his wealth. Pompey and Crassus, two men who had thrived under Sulla, now turned to each other not as enemies, but as uneasy partners. In 70 BC, they were elected consuls together, and though both had Sullan roots, their agenda was populist. They dismantled many of Sulla's harshest laws, restored the tribunate's powers, and began pivoting away from Sulla's conservative vision. It was an ironic twist. Sulla had tried to save the Republic by force, but his own protégés were now reversing his work. The heart of the crisis, however, remained unresolved. The Republic still relied on strong personalities to function. Laws were no longer sacred, precedents meant little. Armies were loyal to generals, not the state. Elections were marred by corruption, bribery, and violence. And all of this, every single rot in the system, had been accelerated by Sulla's reign. Then came the Catiline conspiracy. In 63 BC, a former patrician named Lucius Sergius Catilina, or Catiline, conspired to overthrow the Republic. He rallied indebted citizens, disaffected veterans, and political outcasts. His plot was bold: seize power by force, assassinate senators, and burn Rome if necessary. It failed. The famed orator Cicero, serving as consul, exposed the plot in a series of dramatic speeches. Catiline fled, and his army was destroyed. But the episode revealed how fragile Rome truly was. Even decades after Sulla, violence was still seen as a viable path to power. Meanwhile, Caesar's star continued to rise. Elected as Pontifex Maximus in 63 BC, and later praetor, he began maneuvering with brilliance and caution. He understood the game. He forged alliances, built friendships with Crassus, and eventually Pompey. By 60 BC, the first triumvirate was born, an informal alliance between Caesar, Pompey, and Crassus. Three of the most powerful men in Rome, bound not by law, but by ambition and mutual benefit. Sulla's old dream of restoring senatorial authority was dead. Now, men ruled Rome, not laws. Caesar soon departed for Gaul, where he began a decade-long campaign of conquest that would make him a legend. Pompey remained in Rome, governing with increasing unease. Crassus, eager for military glory, died in the disastrous Parthian campaign at Carrhae. The balance collapsed. Caesar, emboldened and popular, marched on Rome in 49 BC just as Sulla had done before. The Senate fled, Pompey fled, and civil war broke out again. This time, the end was different. Caesar emerged victorious, crossed the Rubicon, and declared himself dictator for life. The Republic gasped, but it no longer had the strength to resist. In 44 BC, Caesar was assassinated by senators claiming to defend the Republic. But what they killed was not tyranny, it was the last hope of the old order. Rome descended once more into chaos, and from it, a new figure rose: Octavian, later known as Augustus, Caesar's adopted heir. Rome would never again be a republic, it would become an empire. And Sulla, he had been dead for over 3 decades. But his fingerprints were everywhere. He had taught Rome that a general could defy the Senate, that soldiers could be more loyal to one man than to the state, that violence could be law, that a single man could remake Rome by will alone. Augustus would later claim to restore the Republic, but in truth, he completed what Sulla had begun: concentrating power in a single ruler, cloaked in tradition, backed by military might. Sulla had not been the last of the old order. He was the first of something new. He was a warning, a lesson, a beginning, and though his bones lay silent in Campania, Rome would never forget the man who had dared conquer his own city twice and in doing so, had unknowingly killed the Republic he thought he saved. The man who stepped down from absolute power did not vanish from memory. Even in death, Sulla's shadow stretched across Rome like a thundercloud. He had rewritten the rules, then broken them, but the seeds he sowed were not those of peace. They were of violence, ambition, and revenge. When Sulla died in 78 BC, the Republic did not mourn. His funeral was elaborate, yes, befitting a man of his rank, but many saw it not as an ending, but as a release. For Rome, however, it was only the beginning of a new and dangerous chapter. Sulla had claimed to restore the Republic, but what he had truly done was tear it from its foundations. His constitutional reforms were designed to empower the aristocracy and weaken the plebeians, but they had the opposite effect. By humiliating the populares, silencing the tribunes, and filling the Senate with his own men, Sulla made enemies out of entire classes, and those enemies were waiting. The moment he died, his reforms came under attack. The consul Marcus Aemilius Lepidus attempted to overturn Sulla's laws, restore the tribunes' powers, and reclaim lands taken during the proscriptions. Civil unrest followed. Lepidus even took up arms against the Senate, but he was defeated by Sulla's former general Pompey. And here lies the true irony of Sulla's legacy. He had filled the Republic with men like himself, ambitious, ruthless, and capable of commanding armies loyal to them rather than the state. Pompey, Crassus, Caesar, all of them were shaped by Sulla's Rome. They learned that power did not reside in laws or traditions, but in legions, in violence, in the audacity to seize control when the opportunity appeared. Sulla's dictatorship had made something clear. Rome could be ruled by one man, and soon, many would try. Take Gnaeus, Pompeius Magnus, or Pompey the Great. As a young man, he had served Sulla loyally, earning his patroness trust and even the nickname Young Butcher for his merciless efficiency during the civil wars. After Sulla's death, Pompey continued to build his reputation. He crushed Lepidus, campaigned in Spain, and eliminated piracy from the Mediterranean. He was hailed as Rome's great hope, but Pompey's ambition outgrew the Senate. Like Sulla, he saw the Senate as weak, divided, petty, and incapable of ruling effectively. He aligned himself with Marcus Licinius Crassus, Rome's richest man, and a rising star named Julius Caesar. Together, they formed the First Triumvirate, secret alliance that effectively ruled Rome. This unholy alliance might never have existed had Sulla not shown the way. By marching on Rome, by using military strength to seize political control, Sulla had set the precedent. He shattered the taboo. Now others would follow. And yet, even as his heirs rose, the Republic crumbled. Sulla's greatest failure was that he believed he could control history, that by rewriting the laws and killing his enemies, he could bring stability. But he didn't kill ambition. He only inflamed it. Julius Caesar, whom Sulla once tried to kill but spared under pressure, would become the ultimate product of this new Rome. Sulla had seen something dangerous in the young Caesar. He once warned, "There are many Mariuses in Caesar," and he was right. Caesar learned from Sulla not just the art of war, but the art of power. When he crossed the Rubicon in 49 BC, he echoed Sulla's march on Rome, like his predecessor. He defied the Senate, ignited civil war, and ultimately took supreme power. But unlike Sulla, Caesar would not step down. And when Caesar fell to assassins in 44 BC, Rome plunged again into blood and chaos. The Republic would never recover. It would dissolve in war until Augustus Caesar's adopted son emerged victorious and established the Roman Empire. So, in truth, Sulla did not restore the Republic. He ended it, not in name but in spirit. He shattered the illusion that Rome was a government of laws, of checks and balances. He revealed its fragility, its decay. And in doing so, he lit the fuse for an explosion that would echo for generations. Even centuries later, historians debate Sulla's legacy. Was he a savior, or a tyrant, a visionary, or a destroyer? He believed himself to be a second founder of Rome, someone chosen by fate to preserve the old ways. But perhaps that belief itself was his greatest illusion. In trying to stop the tide of revolution, he created the very storm he feared. The Republic could not survive him, not because of what he did to it, but because of what he revealed about it. Sulla was dead, but the scars he left behind were deep, raw, and unhealed. In the quiet of his villa in Campania, Lucius Cornelius Sulla had spent his final days indulging in pleasures, feasting, writing, reflecting. Perhaps he believed his legacy would be that of a restorer, man who saved Rome from chaos. But history had other plans. Rome in 78 BC was not at peace. Not truly. Beneath the surface of apparent order, tremors shook the foundations of the Republic. Sulla's reforms had strengthened the Senate, yes, but they had weakened the people's voice. His prescriptions had killed thousands, but they had also created thousands more enemies. And his precedent of marching on Rome had shattered a line that was never meant to be crossed. The very tools Sulla had used, violence, fear, political manipulation, were now freely available to any who dared. One of the first to rise from Sulla's ashes was Marcus Aemilius Lepidus. He had once been a supporter of Sulla, but now, sensing opportunity, he turned against the Senate. As consul, he pushed for the reversal of Sulla's reforms and open challenge to the new order. Civil unrest followed, riots, armed standoffs, a rebellion. Though it was ultimately crushed by Sulla's loyalists, it was a clear sign. The Republic had not been saved, it had only been paused. Then came Sertorius, a former Marian general who refused to submit to Sulla's rule. Fleeing to Hispania, he built a rival government there complete with its own senate. For nearly a decade, he fought a guerrilla war against Rome, drawing support from native tribes and disaffected Roman soldiers. Even after Sulla's death, Sertorius held his ground. His assassination in 72 BC ended the rebellion, but not the idea it carried that Rome was no longer united in spirit or in law. And there was another consequence of Sulla's dictatorship, one that would prove fatal to the Republic itself. Sulla had given rise to Pompey and Crassus, two ambitious men who had grown powerful under his shadow. Crassus had profited from the prescriptions, buying land and property from the dead. Pompey had marched with Sulla through Italy, gaining fame, wealth, and the title Magnus, the Great, before he had even held political office. In the years that followed, both men would compete for dominance. Crassus crushed the Spartacus slave rebellion in 71 BC. while Pompey claimed credit for ending the Sertorian War. Despite mutual distrust, they allied and were both elected consuls in 70 BC. Together, they rolled back many of Sulla's reforms, restoring the powers of the tribunes, and once again shifting the balance of power. But their alliance was uneasy, built more on rivalry than loyalty. Meanwhile, a young nobleman was watching, learning, calculating. His name was Gaius Julius Caesar. Born in 100 BC into a patrician family that had lost much of its former glory, Caesar had barely escaped Sulla's proscriptions. His aunt was married to Marius. His own name had marked him for death. But he was spared, reportedly after influential figures pleaded for his life. Sulla had let him live but warned that he saw many Mariuses in that young man. He was right. Caesar would rise through the ranks with unmatched ambitions, serving in the military, mastering oratory, and charming the Roman masses. He would position himself as a man of the people, just as Marius had once done, but with the military genius of Sulla and the political cunning of both. The Republic had entered a dangerous phase where personal armies meant more than law, where ambition overruled tradition, and where the line between defender and destroyer of Rome grew thin. Sulla's funeral had been grand. Thousands attended. Veterans marched. Eulogies were spoken. But not everyone mourned. Some remembered the executions, the lists, the property seizures, the silence of fear, and others, especially the young and ambitious, remembered something else entirely: that the Senate could be overruled, that tradition could be broken, that Rome was no longer ruled by its people, or even by its laws. It was ruled by those who dared to take it. And so, the republic Sulla claimed to save would slowly unravel. It would bleed through the ambitions of men like Crassus, Pompey, and eventually, Caesar himself. Sulla had thought his story ended with his retirement, his reforms, and his death. But in truth, he had only written the preface to Rome's final chapters. The man who conquered Rome had opened the floodgates. Now, others would follow, and the city would never be the same again. By the time Sulla withdrew from the stage of Roman politics, the city he left behind was no longer the Rome of his youth. It was a wounded republic, stitched together with fear, vengeance, and suspicion. The people had tasted the chaos of civil war, the tyranny of unchecked power, and the betrayal of the institutions they once believed were eternal. But the echoes of Sulla's legacy didn't die with him. In truth, they had only just begun to reverberate. His death in 78 BC did not usher in peace. Almost immediately, resistance to his reforms surged. Many had grudgingly accepted his rule out of fear, not respect. With the dictator now gone, former enemies began to rise from the shadows, determined to undo what Sulla had imposed. One of the first to act was Marcus Aemilius Lepidus, a consul who positioned himself as the voice of the people. Lepidus promised to reverse Sulla's prescriptions and restore the power of the tribunes. But the Senate, still packed with Sullan loyalists, viewed him as a threat. Tensions boiled over into yet another violent conflict. Lepidus raised an army, but his rebellion was quickly crushed in 77 BC still. It signaled something critical: Sulla's reforms, no matter how sweeping, could not suppress ambition. Meanwhile, a name whispered during Sulla's final years was beginning to rise in prominence: Gnaeus, Pompeius, Magnus, or Pompey the Great. Though young and untested by Roman standards, Pompey had impressed Sulla during the civil war. He was bold, ruthless, and politically astute, traits that reminded many of Sulla himself. After Sulla's death, Pompey was granted extraordinary powers to crush remaining uprisings across Italy and Spain. But even more dangerous than Pompey's ascent was the rise of a man Sulla had once mocked with a warning: "There is in this Caesar many a Marius." That man was Gaius Julius Caesar. Caesar had survived Sulla's purges only because influential allies begged for his life. Sulla reluctantly spared him, but not without caution. He recognized the fire in Caesar's eyes, the ambition, the charisma, the defiance, traits that mirrored his old rival, Marius. As the years passed, Caesar quietly rose through the cursus honorum, the ladder of political offices in Rome. He built alliances, wooed the masses, and studied the mistakes and victories of men like Sulla. But unlike Sulla, Caesar understood something more profound. Sulla had used brute force to seize power. Caesar would mix charm, populism, and military genius to make the people beg for it. Back in the heart of Rome, the wounds of the civil war festered. The Senate remained a fractured institution, torn between traditionalists and ambitious newcomers. The plebeians, ordinary Roman citizens, felt increasingly powerless. Sulla's curtailing of the tribunate had robbed them of their voice. Resentment simmered in the streets. And amid all this, the memory of Sulla remained both as a cautionary tale and as a dark inspiration. His bold march on Rome had set a precedent that could not be undone. What once would have been unclean pelvermen, generals turning their legions on their own capital, was now part of the political playbook. But Sulla's impact wasn't limited to politics or the battlefield. He had redefined Roman masculinity and leadership. Strength was no longer measured by rhetoric or lawmaking. Alone it was power enforced by legions, secured by violence, and maintained through fear. Future leaders learned that lesson well. In the provinces, the ripple effects continued. Governors began to act more independently, seeing the instability in Rome as an opportunity. Corruption increased as loyalty to the Senate weakened. The military, once an extension of the Republic, became increasingly loyal to individual commanders, men who paid them, led them, and promised them land and riches. Sulla had tried to freeze Rome in a past. He romanticized a time when the Senate ruled and tradition held sway. But the world had moved on. His methods, instead of restoring balance, had tilted the scales permanently. The Republic had been bent, cracked, and reforged in violence. And though Sulla was gone, the torch had been picked up by a new generation: Pompey, Crassus, Caesar. Each of them would wrestle with the shadow of Sulla's legacy. Each of them would chase greatness, some with words, others with swords. The story of Rome was entering a new chapter, but the ink with which it was written, power, blood, ambition, had first been spilled by the man who conquered Rome. Rome, in the years after Sulla's death, did not find peace. It found an open wound. The reforms he had left behind were brittle and just, deeply resented, and already fraying, but his influence lingered like a ghost, shaping the ambitions of a new generation raised in the shadow of civil war and unchecked power. Young men who had witnessed Sulla's dominance firsthand, Pompey, Crassus, and most fatefully, Julius Caesar, each took a lesson from his rise. The lesson wasn't about constitutionalism or tradition. It was about what a man could do with enough soldiers and enough will. The Roman Republic had always been a delicate balance of powers between Senate and people, consul and tribune, patrician and plebeian, but Sulla had upset that balance completely. The Senate, filled with his hand-picked loyalists, no longer carried the same legitimacy. The tribunes, once the voice of the people, had been stripped of their strength. And the people, worn down by wars, inflation, and hunger, were searching for saviors, not senators. Pompey was the first to truly wield Sulla's legacy as a weapon. Though he had served under Sulla, Pompey had ambitions far greater than any general before him. With his military genius and relentless drive, he earned the nickname Magnus Pompey the Great. He cleared the Mediterranean of pirates, conquered the East, and returned to Rome a hero. But his power, like Sulla's, was rooted in military loyalty, not republican office. And then came Crassus, richer than any Roman alive. He built his fortune in the fires of Sulla's prescriptions, buying up seized properties for pennies. He had no love for the Republic, only for influence and the gold that bought it. His rivalry with Pompey grew bitter, but they remained bound by common ambition. Enter Julius Caesar, a young nobleman with the blood of kings and the charm of a god. He was only a child when Sulla rose, but Sulla had marked him as dangerous even then. Caesar had narrowly escaped death under Sulla's dictatorship, but rather than silence him, the threat had shaped him. Caesar learned patience, timing, and above all, the price of power. Together, Pompey, Crassus, and Caesar would form the first triumvirate, a secret alliance to dominate Rome. But their partnership was not built on trust, it was built on ambition. And ambition is fiery, burns hot, fast, and eventually, it consumes everything. Sulla had warned Rome that one man with an army could take the Republic. He had proven it, and now, others were eager to follow the path he had carved. But while Rome's future turned toward these new titans, Sulla's own image was being reshaped. Some viewed him as a necessary evil, a man who had crushed the chaos and restored order. Others saw a tyrant, whose cruelty opened the door for dictators to follow. Neither image was entirely wrong. In many ways, Sulla was a symptom of a deeper sickness. Rome had grown too large, too fast. Its institutions could no longer serve its empire. Corruption was rampant, inequality, crushing. The old Republic, designed for a small city-state, was straining under the weight of Mediterranean conquest. Sulla exploited that system, but he didn't break it alone. He was the crack before the shatter. The Senate had failed the people. The people had lost faith, and into that void strongmen stepped. By the time Caesar marched across the Rubicon in 49 BC, Sulla's ghost was fully awake. When Caesar declared, "The die is cast," he wasn't inventing revolution. He was channeling Sulla's spirit, bold, defiant, and utterly certain of his place in history. Rome was no longer a republic of equals. It was a battlefield for giants. And Sulla had been the first giant to walk across the sacred city walls with legions behind him. The laws he passed, the blood he spilled, the reforms he etched into Rome's bones, they were still echoing. Even decades after his death, Roman politics bore his fingerprints. Even the men who claimed to hate him could not help but imitate him. The next chapter in Roman history would not be written by the Senate, nor by laws. It would be written by generalsmen who ruled with swords and silenced their enemies with fear. And none of it would have been possible without Sulla. The man who conquered Rome had also conquered time, shaping the very soul of the Republic long after his heart stopped beating. But even Sulla could not imagine how far the next conqueror would go. Rome's final transformation was coming. The age of emperors was near. The death of Sulla in 78 BC did not bring the peace he had promised Rome. In fact, it did the opposite. His resignation from the dictatorship, while unprecedented, left behind a republic scarred and reshaped by violence and fear. His reforms, meant to restore the authority of the Senate and check the ambitions of populists, quickly began to unravel. And with Sulla gone, the very men he had mentored began challenging the very structures he had tried to preserve. The first to rise was Marcus Aemilius Lepidus, elected consul in the same year as Sulla's death. Lepidus, once a sullen supporter, quickly pivoted to attack his reforms. He called for the restoration of land to those who had been dispossessed during the proscriptions, and pushed for the return of power to the tribunes of the plebs. His populist agenda struck a nerve with the Roman poor, many of whom still mourned the brutal legacy of Sulla's reign. It didn't take long for conflict to ignite. By 77 BC, Rome was once again on the brink of civil war. Lepidus marched on the city, but he lacked both the charisma and military genius of his predecessor. He was defeated by Quintus Lutatius Catullus and a rising star in Roman politics, Pompey. With Lepidus crushed and exiled, Pompey's status surged. Sulla had called Pompey the Great even in his youth, and now the name seemed prophetic. But Pompey wasn't the only young man rising in Rome's new era. Across the political spectrum stood Julius Caesar, relative of Marius, a survivor of the Sullan purges, and a man marked by caution and ambition in equal measure. Though still young and without much power, Caesar watched the unfolding chaos with calculating eyes. The cracks in the Republic widened as new threats emerged abroad. In Spain, a former Marian general, Quintus Sertorius, had established a breakaway Roman state. He governed with both Roman order and Iberian support, challenging the authority of Rome itself. It took years of brutal campaigns for Pompey and Metellus Pius to finally put down the rebellion. Sertorius, however, was not beaten on the battlefield. He was assassinated by his own men, proof that even in foreign provinces, betrayal had become the rule. And then came one of the greatest crises of the age, the Spartacus Rebellion. In 73 BC, a Thracian gladiator named Spartacus led a revolt of slaves from a gladiator school in Capua. What began as a desperate escape turned into a full-blown war. Tens of thousands of slaves joined the cause, defeating Roman forces again and again. The rebellion terrified the Senate, revealing just how fragile Rome's foundations had become. The task of crushing the rebellion eventually fell to Marcus Licinius Crassus, Rome's richest man, and a man who had profited enormously from Sulla's prescriptions. Crassus fought ruthlessly, even reviving decimation, executing 1 in 10 of his own men for cowardice to instill discipline. After finally defeating Spartacus in 71 BC, he crucified 6,000 slaves along the Appian Way, a horrifying message of Roman authority. But the victory wasn't his alone. Pompey, returning from Spain, intercepted fleeing remnants of the rebellion and claimed credit for its suppression. The rivalry between Crassus and Pompey was born. And though they were elected consuls together in 70 BC, it was an uneasy alliance. The Republic now rested on the backs of men whose ambition matched Sulla Espot, whose loyalties were far less certain. Meanwhile, in the shadows, Julius Caesar began building his political base. He took minor posts, made speeches in favor of the populares, and won favor with the people. He understood what Sulla had feared, that the Republic's institutions were hollow, that real power came from the army, the mob, and personal charisma. Rome entered a new phase, one Sulla had predicted, but could not prevent. The Republic had not been healed by his dictatorship, it had merely been paused. What followed was a political landscape dominated by strongmen, shifting alliances, and personal vendettas. The Senate had become a stage, not a place of governance. Violence had become a tool of policy, and Rome's most dangerous men had learned one lesson from Sulla above all: power was taken, not given. Sulla may have died in his villa, but his ghost haunted Rome. The weapons he forged, the prescriptions, the march on Rome, the use of military force for political ends were now standard tactics. His successors would perfect them, and in time, one of them would cross the Rubicon. Long after his body had been placed into the tomb in the field of Mars, long after the echo of his marching legions had faded into memory, Lucius Cornelius Sulla continued to haunt Rome, not as a man, but as a symbol. Rome had seen war before, civil strife, power-hungry generals, but never had it seen someone like Sulla. He had set a precedent that could not be undone. He had proven, with terrifying clarity, that might could rewrite law, that a general could seize the capital, rewrite the rules, and walk away unpunished. The old balances were shattered. The Republic, though still breathing, had become brittle and trembling, and every young man who dreamed of power remembered Sulla. The Senate, though supposedly restored by Sulla, found itself hollowed out. It had become a puppet for those with armies behind them. The laws Sulla imposed were as fragile as parchment before fire. The moment his iron grip was gone, many of his reforms began to crumble. The tribunes slowly regained their powers. The people stirred once more. Ambition smoldered in the hearts of those who had seen what Sulla had done and now imagined what they could do. One such man was Julius Caesar. In his youth, Caesar had narrowly escaped Sulla's purges. Sulla had warned the Senate about him, famously saying, "In this Caesar there are many Mariuses." He had seen in the boy the same dangerous ambition that had driven Gaius Marius, Caesar's uncle by marriage, and the same fire that had burned within himself. Sulla may have stepped down voluntarily, but his methods had opened a door that would never close. Pompey, Crassus, and eventually Caesar would walk through it. All of them were shaped by the shadow of Sulla, knowingly or not. And yet, there was irony in his story. Sulla had wanted to restore the Republic, He saw the populists and demagogues as threats to order and tradition. He believed that only through purging the corrupt and empowering the Senate could Rome be saved. But in trying to save it, he had shown Rome that rules could be discarded, that law bowed to the sword, that the dictator's chair was not an emergency post, it could be a throne. His legacy was not a preserved republic, but a roadmap to tyranny. Still, Sulla was no mere monster. His character was far more complex. He was educated, charismatic, witty, even generous to friends and subordinates. His personal courage was unquestionable. He was not driven purely by greed or lust for power. He genuinely believed, in his own brutal way, that Rome needed purging, that he was the surgeon, cutting away rot, but the scalpel he wielded became an axe, and the wound never truly healed. In the years following his death, Sulla's memory became a subject of fierce debate. Some admired him for restoring stability, however temporary. Others reviled him as a butcher and tyrant. He had ended one crisis but had planted the seeds of another. The Roman civil wars that followed, Pompey versus Caesar, Antony versus Octavian, were echoes of the chaos Sulla had unleashed. The dictatorship of Sulla paved the way for Caesar's own dictatorship, which in turn led to Augustus and the birth of the Roman Empire. What Sulla had done in his lifetime changed, not just politics, it changed Rome's very soul. Rome no longer feared the tyrant. It began to expect him. His epitaph, carved into stone by his own design, read, "No better friend, no worse enemy." It was fitting, for Sulla's life was a duality. Brilliant and ruthless, a genius of war and a destroyer of peace, a defender of the Republic who ensured its downfall. And so, the ghost of Sulla lingered, whispering into the ears of future emperors, casting a long, bloody shadow over the fate of Rome. The sun had long set on Sulla's career when his legacy truly began to show its teeth. Rome was restless again. The peace he forged through blood was inevitably fragile. After Sulla's death, the Republic stumbled forward, but it was never the same. The old rules still existed on parchment, yes, but in the hearts of men, something fundamental had changed. They had tasted what it meant to live under fear. They had seen how easily the structures of power could be bent, how even the sacred Senate could tremble before a man with an army. This shift didn't happen overnight. It happened with each small act of defiance. Each young general who saw politics as a battlefield, each veteran who marched on Rome not as a citizen but as a loyal soldier of a single man. Pompey would be the first to truly carry on the Sullan tradition. He too raised private legions. He too defied the Senate's orders when it suited him. The Republic had tried to honor him, tried to keep him close, but he never forgot that Sulla had called him Pompey the Great. That title stayed with him, shaping his path. And then came Caesar. The young noble whom Sulla once warned would bring fire to Rome grew into its most brilliant and dangerous figure. Unlike Sulla, Caesar did not retire after victory. He marched on Rome not once, but again and again. He ruled as dictator for life. He reformed everything, then was murdered by those who feared he had become a king. And yet, it wasn't just about Caesar. Augustus, Rome's first true emperor, rose from the ashes of Caesar's assassination. And by then, the idea of a republic was little more than a memory. The Senate still existed, of course, but its voice was quiet, its hands tied. Sulla had lived only to see the beginning of this transformation, but in truth, he was its architect. His dictatorship had exposed the fatal flaw in the Republic, that its strength relied on the restraint of powerful men. The moment someone like Sulla chose to cross the line, to march on Rome, to write names on prescription lists, to execute senators without trial, that unwritten trust was shattered, and it could never be fully rebuilt. Sulla had taken that step first, and every man who came after him followed his footprints deeper into authoritarianism, deeper into civil war, and finally, into empire. But here's the paradox of Lucius Cornelius Sulla. He didn't live for glory. He didn't die clutching power. He walked away. He could have made himself king. He could have kept the legions at his side, but he didn't. He retired. He threw lavish parties. He wrote memoirs. He died quietly in his villa. It was almost as if he wanted to prove a point that he could dominate Rome, and then choose not to. But the men who came after didn't make that same choice. Sulla had opened the gates. Others would rush through them, and, this time, they would never turn back. By the time the Republic truly ended, decades after his death, Sulla's name was both feared and revered. Some said he saved Rome, others said he doomed it. But everyone agreed on one thing. Lucius Cornelius Sulla changed the Roman world forever. History remembers kings and emperors, but sometimes it is the man who steps outside of both, who walks through fire and turns back, that casts the longest shadow. Sulla was not a myth. He was not a monster. He was human, flawed, brilliant, ruthless, and deeply Roman. He shaped an era not by dreaming of glory, but by confronting chaos head-on, no matter the cost. In the end, he left Rome bloodied, but alive, and forever changed. Thank you for joining us on this journey into one of history's most complex and unforgettable lives. If this story moved you, taught you something new, or made you see history through a more human lens, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. We bring you history not just as a list of dates and battles, but as living, breathing stories that still echo in our world today. I'm your guide through time, and I promise to always bring you the truth, raw, honest, and alive. See you in the next chapter of the past.